Welcome, fellow traveler, to phase 2 of the journey. The path to enlightenment begins from within and spreads outwards into the universe. As the universe is the manifestation of the essence of consciousness, no outward motion can occur without inward transformation. As such, it is up to you, the traveler, to unlock what awaits beyond the veil.
Welcome back, fellow travelers. Hour number 2, and we are going to travel at the speed of hyperspace this evening. We're going to journey to many different places, to Nikola Tesla's work, to the supernatural history of time travel. Is it a fact? Is it fiction? Is this where science fiction meets science fact? Admiral Byrd's secret journey beyond the poles. We'll even touch upon ancient Egypt a little bit and some paranormal activity in the Great Pyramids. Tim R. Swartz is an Emmy award-winning television producer and videographer and is the author of a number of popular books, including The Lost Journals of Nikola Tesla, America's Strange and Supernatural History, Time Travel, Fact, Not Fiction, and Admiral Byrd's Secret Journey Beyond the Poles. As a photojournalist, Tim Swartz has traveled extensively and investigated paranormal phenomenon and other unusual mysteries from such diverse locations as the Great Pyramids in Egypt, the Great Wall in China, and many, many more. He's also worked with television networks and also appeared on the History Channel program Ancient Aliens and a few others as well. ConspiracyJournal.com is the website. Tim, how are you doing, sir?
Why, it's great to be with you tonight, Chris. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. I don't even know where to begin with you because these are all my favorite topics here. I guess the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart is the Great Pyramid, Egypt. I feel very connected to that location. I think there were some past life experiences there, but I've never thought of paranormal activity in the Great Pyramid. Can we touch upon that a little bit?
You know, I think that there are a lot of locations on this planet that they seem to be focal points for, and I'll use the word paranormal activity, I mean, for want of a better word. Possibly the ancients realized that there are places that are special, and then they built structures there. Here in southern Indiana, where I live, there are Indian mounds, we call them Indian mounds, Native American structures. Now, really, that's all that's left are mounds of dirt. But these areas have a long history of ghost sightings, UFO activity, even cryptid creatures like Bigfoot and things like that. So I don't think that it's too unusual to take a look at places like the Great Pyramid and, the other associated pyramids on the Giza Plateau and look for paranormal activity. When I was there, and I've been there, a couple of times, I had a very unusual experience there in the Great Chamber, where, and you have to realize, Chris, I am not psychic in any way. It's just, I'm kind of like a brick when it comes to stuff like that, unfortunately. But when I was in the King's Chamber and actually touched, that what's supposed to be, the sarcophagus there in the chamber, I had this experience where it seemed to me that for a brief period of time, I was living somebody else's life that wasn't an Egyptian in the the ancient time of the pharaohs. And to this day, I'm still trying to process my experience because everything happens. The experience that I had, everything happened. It seemed like I was living somebody else's life, and it went on. It seemed to me for like a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months, but it was just really an instant in real time, and it shook me profoundly. And I started doing research on that, and I've run across a number of cases where other people have reported similar circumstances in that same area. So it's prompted me to ask other people when they go to some of these ancient sites to ask them if they ever had similar experiences to that. And and that's just one of many especially in the Giza Plateau area.
You're giving me
paranormal activity.
You're giving me chills with these stories.
Oh, yeah.
I've been called to Egypt for the last 3 or 4 years. I just haven't had a chance to make it out there because of too many obligations and responsibilities here. But I can only imagine the energy that resides there, and some of the experiences. I've heard others report these type of paranormal experiences too. This is just a little bit of a side note, but there's actually a pyramid about 8 kilometers away called Abu Rosh, and it's built on top of a mountain. And the reason that they don't talk about it too much, at least according to this Egyptologist that I was reading about, they claim that it goes against the typical and accepted construction of the pyramids because it was built up on top of a mountain, and the science behind it just simply wouldn't work built on top of a mountain. So they just kind of pushed it to the side and just act like it doesn't even exist. They don't even have guard towers there or anything like that. So I know it's difficult spending the night within the Great Pyramid itself, but there's other sites that seem to be open. I wonder what would happen if you actually spent the night in one of these locations.
It's unfortunate right now. The political climate in Egypt has made it very difficult, for people like ourselves, really, to spend any time there and feel safe. But when you go to the Giza Plateau, I mean, people just don't realize, first of all, how large that area is, and how much stuff. That's the best way I can put it. How much stuff is actually there? I mean, you can't walk on that area without walking on some kind of ancient structure or the remains of an ancient structure. So, and you're absolutely right. When you're there, if you're fortunate enough to go, like we were able to early in the morning, before the tourists show up, before the hawkers, the people who bring in the pyramids and want you to not the pyramids, who bring in the camels and want you to ride the camels and take pictures and things like that. The place is so special, and there's this vibe to it that if you allow yourself to open up to it, it's just it's really overwhelming. And it's it's no wonder, I think, that they chose that area to build the pyramids and other structures and other tombs and the Great Sphinx, which may have been there actually before they built the pyramids. It's hard to say, but like I said previously, this is just one of many locations all across the globe that has that spiritual connection that all of us, I think, are really capable of tapping into if we just open ourselves up, if we stop if we stop being robots and just living our days from so many people go through their lives asleep.
Very well said. And we're going to wake those people up right on the other side, Tim. Don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back right here, Beyond the Veil. few years ago, we started experiencing what I call time shifts, and we didn't have a context to put it in. We noticed buildings popping up where they weren't before overnight. After speaking with some of the people at the restaurant there, they had the same experience. We went to go fill up our water bottles from a reverse osmosis place that we had just been to a week prior that was completely gone. And we didn't know what to make of it, so we started talking about this. And I remember when I first started talking about it, I thought I was losing my mind a little bit, and I was reluctant to bring it up with people, but I did on the show, and more people started talking about it. And then somebody coined the term the Mandela Effect, which is the result of different time shifts and time travel, I would say, or effects of what I imagine is either altering the timeline or going back and altering something in the timeline, which creates an echoing effect. We're on the subject of Egypt with Tim Swartz and paranormal phenomenon there. And just at a whim during the break, I Googled Mandela Effect Egypt. And sure enough, there are people reporting that they remember the pyramids all lining up with Orion's belt, and they remember them all looking relatively the same size from a top-down view. And this blogger here is claiming that the smallest pyramid looks way smaller than they remember it and further away, and it doesn't really line up with Orion's belt anymore. Tim, your thoughts on the concept of the Mandela Effect, and maybe you can give some insight into this. Are people just not remembering correctly what the pyramids look like, especially from a top-down view, or has something indeed changed as the timeline has shifted?
Well, that's an interesting question, and you know, it's I've been reading up on that effect as well. I think that you know, there were people who were talking about gosh, what was that? The Berenstain Bears.
Yes,
Yes.
that's the most famous.
Right. That's one that I've heard a lot about.
Well, did you
You
know the trademark attorney? He
Mhm.
states in his bio that he trademarked the Berenstain Bears, not the Berenstain Bears. So you'd imagine the trademark attorney knows how to
it's
spell it
spelled.
better than anybody else.
You would think so.
And that would make sense, too. If it really is a true Mandela effect, it's all changed except for the memory.
Well, and you know, and there are the cases where people are reporting, say, like they remember Nelson Mandela, you know, dying years ago rather than just several years ago, and other, you know, famous cases as well. So, you know, you have to wonder whether or not people just have faulty memories, which we know that they do, or like you stated, is there something going on where time is being changed and we are getting an echo effect as it, you know, as this change then travels down the stream of time, almost like a ripple. You know, you drop a rock into the water, you'll see the circles of waves emanating from that point. So, is that an effect that we are experiencing? Somebody somewhere along the line has managed to change the past, and rather than being something, you know, at least in this timeline, cataclysmic, you know, like the Simpsons episode where, you know, Homer goes back in time with his toaster, and
That's a great one.
It is. I love that one. But you know, it's it shows very well that whole science fiction concept. I think it was conceived by Ray Bradbury, that, you know, even the smallest changes in the past could have cataclysmic effects down the future. Well, you know, is that necessarily the case? You know, maybe small changes produce small effects. You know, like you said, like people remembering a different name or somebody dying when the rest of us remember them dying just more recently. As for now, I have not heard about the supposed changes in the three major pyramids there in Giza. I mean, I've studied that quite a bit, and you know, I mean, they do seem to align with the three stars in Orion's belt, though there has been controversy with some scientists saying, oh well, they don't really align, it just looks that way. It could be that some of these people who are making these statements have never been there, and they're just basing this on looking at them from the pictures or from the satellite images of these three pyramids. But as far as I know, they still appear to me to be lined up with Orion's belt, and the third one is considerably smaller than the Great Pyramid, and then I can't remember what the second one is. That's almost as big, that sits next to it.
Right.
I agree with you. I think a lot of this is bad memory. What are the most popular ones? Sex in the City and Sex and the City. I think that's just remembering it incorrectly.
Right.
And it's very easy to confuse too. There was one that really got me though, and that's Build It and They Will Come. Build It and They Will Come. And it turned into Build It and He Will Come. And of course, Snow White's magic mirror on the wall. It used to be mirror, mirror on the wall. And you find references to mirror, mirror on the wall everywhere. But now it's magic mirror on the wall. And it's always been magic mirror on the wall.
Apparently.
Now see, that's a new one to me, because I always remember it as mirror, mirror on the wall. Mm-hmm. Who's the fairest one of all?
That's the one that usually gets people. Before I even say anything about the Mandela Effect, I ask them about that, play them the clip, and they go, what does that mean? Well, here's the Mandela Effect, and then I send them down a rabbit hole. I probably should stop doing that to people because it takes up a lot of their time. But
I think that's great. It's like I said before we went to our break. People tend to walk around asleep, and if you wake them up with something like that, I think that's a good thing, because it makes people open their eyes and take a look at the world as it really is around them, and that's a beautiful thing.
I agree. I do agree with that. It's a fascinating time that we live in, especially with the technology, because now we're really able to prove time travel is a fact, not just fiction. Regarding the time stream, and I want to get your take on this right on the other side. We're about to hit the break in about 30 seconds. But regarding the time stream, I think it's like a flowing river of water, and you throw a stone or a pebble or an object into this flowing stream of water, and it may disrupt things momentarily, but the water's going to take the path of least resistance and eventually start to merge back on top of itself and go back into that regular stream. So that's why we see these small disruptions here and there. Another situation we came across, and this was years ago, again on the broadcast, somebody brought this up, that Betty White had died. And there was a video that I found, and I was looking for this all last night. I couldn't find it, but it was a news reporter talking about a celebrity who was being buried in a grave. And he was standing next to Betty White's grave. And he said, yeah, she's going to be buried right here, right next to Betty White. And Betty White obviously is still alive. So I've heard that she died many times before, though. She's just the woman that just will not go.
Tough
not that we
cookie.
want her to. She's a sweetheart. But still, it's funny. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, traveler. To Beyond the Veil.
I think it was Albert Einstein or somebody else who said, if time travel were possible, there would be one solid piece of evidence, and that is, of course, time travelers. But we see all these pictures now of what people are pointing to as possible time travelers. Our guest is Tim Swartz, author of Time Travel Fact Not Fiction and Admiral Byrd's Secret Journey Beyond the Poles, and many, many more books. Tim, I'm sure you've seen these photos, and there are hundreds of them, of supposed time travelers. A lot of them don't make sense, but some of them are actually kind of striking. There was a video clip of a woman supposedly using a cell phone in a Charlie Chaplin film from the 20s. Now, the first thing that came to mind was, well, they didn't have cell phone towers back then, so there's no way that she was using a cell phone. After a little bit of investigation, there was actually a device that looked kind of like a cell phone, but was more of a hearing aid than anything else. It was very strange that she was indeed talking to somebody. She could have been talking to the person behind him. But then you see other photos of people holding what looks like digital cameras, iPads, things like that, that could very well be taken back into the past if there was somebody from the future moving backwards. It doesn't require any kind of external infrastructure to operate the technology. So there are some that are questionable. Your thoughts?
I have yet to see any of these pictures that you've been referring to that have been circulating on the internet that has totally convinced me. As you pointed out, the most famous one I think is of the lady with the object that looks like a cell phone, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there were hearing aid types of devices that were readily available, at that time. There's also the one where there was the hipster in the crowd that was wearing the funky sunglasses. And,
I've got that on my screen right now.
But he, I mean, even though he was kind of standing out from the crowd, what he was wearing, was readily available, at that time. However, I think back to there was a case where this wasn't a photograph. This was a footprint that was found. It was a petrified footprint that looked like a boot. It had ridges in it. It was shaped like a human foot. And the strangest thing is that it had whatever it was, had stepped on a trilobite and had kind of crushed it underneath the foot. Now, at the time that the trilobites were around, that was basically it. There was, like trilobites and, assorted crinoids and things like that.
Single-celled organisms, you mean?
Yeah, they're a little bit more advanced than single cells.
Oh, okay.
But as far as we know, there wasn't any, bipedal animals running around at the time. Yet clearly, this was something that had a human-looking foot that looked like a boot that had stepped on this trilobite. Now, the ancient astronaut folks, they would go and say that, this was an extraterrestrial that was visiting the Earth at the time, and that's what happened. Well, Brad Steiger, I mean, he made the point that this could very well have been a time traveler that had stepped on this trilobite, because. Yeah, and I brought this up before with other people when we talk about the whole like UFO and extraterrestrial concept, is that the majority of the cases when people do run into the occupants of landed UFOs, almost inevitably they're humanoids. They have a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, a mouth, and unless we don't understand, which is a very good possibility, like how life develops on other planets, it seems suspicious to me that intelligent life form that develops in another star system thousands of light years away from us would develop a humanoid shape, and that goes with whatever it was that stepped on that trilobite, more than a couple of million years ago. It's like, 50 million years ago, I think is what it was. So if it wasn't an extraterrestrial, could it have been a time traveler?
I've often wondered that if a lot of these extraterrestrials are actually our descendants thousands of years into the future that are coming back to try to accelerate the consciousness of humanity, or help us along on our path to the merging of technology with ourselves, and they're the result.
That is one of my favorite speculations when it comes to the whole UFO mystery. If you go and say, you're the human species 1,000 years in the future or whenever that you've developed time travel and you want to go back in the past, yet you don't want to, as we talked about before, do something that may alter the past. From history that people were seeing UFOs and seeing, what they thought were extraterrestrials. Well, that would be a great cover, to go back and do whatever it is that you're having to do. When you look at a lot of these UFO cases, the evidence seems to point with a lot of them more and more that you're dealing with time travelers rather than extraterrestrials. Now, again, if a UFO or a spacecraft is coming from another world light years away, you're probably going to have to use a form of time travel anyway to navigate all that distance. So
right.
The idea that our future generations are visiting us, I don't think is that far out. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, interstellar travel seems next to impossible. We had someone on just yesterday, talking about this, and he's a space tourism expert. His name is David Livingston. And he said, I haven't seen yet anything that could get us from point A to point B in an interstellar way. I mean, there's not even anything really in the works for that. And I'm thinking time travel would be pretty much the only way you could pull off interstellar travel.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And the other aspect is that a lot of the close encounter cases where people have had, really just, like personal encounters with these creatures, the UFO nuts will go and tell a lot of these witnesses what's going to happen to them in the future, who they're going to marry, where they're going to live, who's going to, who in their family is going to die, or things like that. You wouldn't think that an extraterrestrial being would have this knowledge, and if they did, why would they care?
Right.
If they're here just conducting scientific investigations and we're nothing more than, say, like, ants or lab rats to them, they wouldn't care if your Uncle Lou is going to die in a car accident 5 years down the line. Yet time and time again, I run across these reports, and I've actually had people tell them, personally tell me these types of stories where these entities that come out of UFOs will talk about future events. So I just think that it's just, unusual. Everything's unusual.
Interesting. I want to have an encounter with some of these beings. I'm constantly putting my thumb up to the sky, but so far, no luck yet. We'll be right back. That spot about Vote for Nobody reminded me of something. Anarchopreneur with Nathan Frazier will be back on air this Sunday. Took a little bit of a vacation to take care of a few personal things. He's back in full force, 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock right here on TFR. Now, we're speaking with Tim Swartz about time travel and Admiral Byrd's secret journey beyond the poles. Now, Tim, how do we tie those two together? Was Admiral Byrd's journey a matter of time travel? But I guess before we answer that question, maybe we should lay it out for people that aren't in the loop on who Admiral Byrd actually was.
Well, yeah. Well, Admiral Byrd was probably the last of the great Arctic explorers. I mean, from a very young age, he was fascinated by both the Arctic and Antarctica, and he made numerous journeys to both, and he actually was the first to fly over the North Pole, him and a navigator, and was also like one of the first to explore large portions of Antarctica, and we're talking about the early 20th century when he was doing this kind of explorations. Now, as for your questions about Admiral Byrd and association with time travel, there's none.
I see.
Okay.
No,
I thought maybe the connection you might have made was as Admiral Byrd flew into that other realm, some people call it the Hollow Earth, but maybe it was some kind of vortex or a time shift or maybe even interdimensional shift.
Similar to the Bermuda Triangle.
Well, okay, that is an interesting point because I don't know if you're familiar with the late great writer Ronpa, T. Lob saying Ronpa. He wrote a number of books about supposedly his life as a Buddhist monk, especially in Tibet. It was later revealed that he was actually an English plumber, but he said that he was a walk-in, so to speak, that at one point in his life that the spirit of T. Lob Singh Ronpa entered his body after he had an accident. And, it appears that, either he had access to a lot of information dealing with some of the more obscure points of Tibetan Buddhism, or there may actually have been something to what he was talking about. In one of his books, several of his books, he wrote extensively about entrances into the cavern systems that supposedly exist all across this planet. But especially there are major entrance points in the Himalayas, Tibet, Nepal, and places like that. And he said that these tunnel systems were built by an antediluvian civilization that existed before the Ice Age, which would have put it past 10,000 years ago, when supposedly there was no advanced civilizations, on this planet.
But coincidentally, the Great Pyramid seems to have been built before that time, as well as the Sphinx.
The Sphinx, especially, there was and I can't think of the guy's name now, right? Offhand, but he wasn't an archaeologist, and but instead he was a weather expert.
Are you talking about? Yep, Schwalbe-Lubitz.
Yeah, and I mean he studied the exterior of the Sphinx, and he said that the damage to it was caused by water, and that at one time the Giza Peninsula had been flooded, and I mean not just like a couple of feet, but over 100 feet. The Sphinx is pretty high,
biblical proportions.
Very much so, but T. Lob Singh Ronpa. He said that there were certain spots in this vast tunnel system where time and space kind of flux, so to speak, and that there was one location especially that was like a multiple entry point. If you would go to this point, in this giant cavern hidden somewhere beneath the earth, that this point was, and it's really difficult to explain. But if you were, say, on another world and traveled to their, through their underground system, you could actually reach that same point. This point bypassed time and space, and you could reach it from a number of different locations throughout the universe. And supposedly now, Admiral Byrd may have traveled to this point and actually witnessed a world beyond our own. In my book about Admiral Byrd, I looked at this, and I looked at it kind of with a skeptical attitude, because supposedly, when he made this journey through the North Pole and was actually greeted by a race of underground people who intercepted him with a flying disc. At that time, he was actually in Antarctica, taking part in a military operation in early 1940s, late 1946, early 1947, called Operation High Jump, which was something that has a mystery around it all on its own. So I speculated that possibly the stories that have come out about Admiral Byrd traveling to the North Pole and having these unusual experiences was really more of a cover story, like a disinformation campaign to hide what was actually going on with Operation High Jump in Antarctica, which, again, it's the waters have become so muddied at this time. I mean, we do know that Operation High Jump existed, that it actually happened. It had the largest Navy contingency of ships and planes and an aircraft carrier and several submarines. And this was just right after World War II, when a lot of the Navy ships were being decommissioned at the time. Then all of a sudden, all of this was brought up. They went to Antarctica for some kind of mission. The story was that it was a practice mission to deal with it in case the Russians came across the North Pole and invaded the United States. Another one was that they were looking for like minerals and things like that. It could be that they were looking for a secret Nazi base. Because we do know that the Nazis had at least one, if not several, facilities in Antarctica.
Right.
And the question of whether or not they were developing, UFO type of aircraft, all of these questions were never really answered, ever.
Exactly. Well, the Operation High Jump was supposed to last over 6 months. They went there during the Arctic summer, or the Antarctic summer, but they actually canceled it and came back after 6 weeks, less than 6 weeks. And some embedded reporters with Argentina newspapers, Admiral Byrd told them that he had to get back to the United States as quickly as possible to tell them what was going on down there.
Wow. Hold right there. We're at the end of the hour, but we have another jam-packed hour with Tim Swartz right here on Beyond the Veil. Don't go anywhere.
Preparing to initiate Phase 3 momentarily. Brace yourself, traveler. We are about to venture into the realms of the unknown. www.beyondtheveilradio.com.
Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting.
traveler to phase 3 of his journey. Here you will experience an even deeper level of understanding as we traverse through the boundaries of hyperspace consciousness. Here, you will find that reality is altered with a single thought and a single intention. Set your intention now and prepare to travel deeper. Deeper, deeper, deeper. Beyond the veil.
I want to get into Tesla technology and the very real possibility of time travel and teleportation based on the technology. Before we jump into that, though, Tim, I want to get some details on the Admiral Byrd experience, or the Admiral Byrd information, I should say, because it has spawned so many different theories. Everything from the Earth is hollow to the Earth is flat to the possibility of dimensional shifts to pretty much everything you can imagine. Maybe it was as simple as covering up the fact that we were looking for Nazis down there in Antarctica. But what are some of the main things that Admiral Byrd wrote about that have caused people to think in so many diverse ways?
Well, that's the thing. Admiral Byrd, if you go by the book that's currently available, the Secret Diary of Admiral Byrd, the Lost Diary of Admiral Byrd. That is, I think, part of the disinformation campaign that has come about. I think really to continue to muddy the waters. Excuse me.
I see, and I've heard that recently. A friend of mine brought that up, and he said, I think that diary is completely fake. I haven't looked into it too much. The only thing I know about is what I've heard guests talking about, but he pointed out that the writing style just seems a lot different than other Admiral Byrd writings.
Very much so. It's very, it's supposed to be based on his logbook when he was making an airplane voyage over the North Pole. And, a lot of it has to do with, like coordinations, how much fuel they had, things like that. But the phraseology, for want of a better word, is a little too modern. In my opinion, I get the impression from reading it that this was something that may have been written maybe in the 1950s. We do know that this particular book surfaced somewhere in the late 1950s. It was what was called a samizdat, which is it wasn't actually printed, but was copied and recopied and, sent to one person. They would copy it and, send it to another person. That's the original gemstone files was the same thing. Nobody really knows where the original publication originated from. So when I was doing my initial research on this, I read that book, and then I went and looked at the historical record. Despite what some people might say, the Operation High Jump was not a secret mission. I mean, they didn't sneak down there and nobody knew about it. No,
right.
It was, everybody knew about it. The sailors and personnel have written about their own experiences. There was even a documentary that was shot during the process and released to theaters. But you have to remember that just because you are part of this mission, and there was I can't even remember how many personnel were involved in this. It doesn't mean that you are privy to what's actually going on. If you're just an enlisted man, you're very tunnel vision, so to speak, on what's actually going on. I mean, you have your job to do, and that's it. Nobody is going to tell you why you're actually there. Admiral Byrd, as when he came back, he actually met with Congress and several different congressional committees. And if he told them what he told these Argentine newspapers, that it was his fear that the United States could be vulnerable to attack by, as he put it, missiles and craft coming over the poles, then he was obviously very concerned about something, in order that they wrapped up their mission in 6 weeks' time and came back to the United States very, very quickly. I think that it's also very telling that just a few months later, we see the first UFO sightings taking place in the United States, starting in June and July of 1947. This was just a few months after Admiral Byrd came back. So we could very well be possibly seeing just exactly what he was afraid of, that there was some kind of aerial activity starting to take place, maybe as a result of Byrd's mission to Antarctica. My own personal theory is that they went down there and they may have found a Nazi base, but I don't think it was either abandoned or it wasn't as threatening as they thought it was going to be. The real center of activity was in South America, but they didn't realize that at the time.
Interesting. There's so many questions surrounding these events. I know he did a TV interview where he talked about finding a continent that I think he said was either as big as North America or as big at least as the United States. I don't remember his exact words, but he said there's a vast amount of resources out there. Some people speculate that the closure of Antarctica and the Antarctic Treaty is essentially to create artificial scarcity throughout the world, where we have an abundant amount of resources, but if we can keep them at a finite level, or at least in the minds of the public, then obviously it keeps prices up. I'll give you an example. In France, they actually have an initiative that they have to throw away X amount of food because they can't have a surplus, because it drives the prices of apples, for instance, down. And they try to keep the prices up. So I wonder if the world operates like that, and that's that has a lot to do with this.
It wouldn't surprise me. Another interesting point about the whole Antarctic quagmire is that even though Antarctica is there's an international treaty that atomic weapons would never be tested there. In 1968, the United States exploded one hydrogen bomb in Antarctica, and the place that they set it off just happened to be the same general area as where it was thought that this Nazi base was located.
Interesting.
You will not. It's very difficult to find information on this particular test. There is one photograph that I have run across that shows the cloud from this explosion, but this was a clear violation of this international treaty, but there was no explanation on why this particular location was picked.
Let me throw an interesting theory out your way, just something to ponder during the break. But what if all of this Mandela Effect stuff is a result of them going back in time and saving Hitler and relocating him to Antarctica for one reason or another, and that created a chain of events? Berenstein Bears turned into Berenstain Bears, and so much more. Magic mirror on the wall. We'll be right back.
My dear traveler, remember this. Whatever plane our consciousness may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are, for the time being, our only realities. However, if we mistake the shadows for realities, we find ourselves confusing the upward progress of the ego as an elevation of consciousness. Thus, beware of oneself when you step beyond the veil.
All right, so let's go to the intersection of science fiction and science fact. Tim Swartz is our guest, and so I want to switch the topic over to Tesla technology and the very real possibility of time travel. Tesla, in my opinion, was very brilliant, and his theories, if properly funded, most of them can actually be manifested. But obviously it's funding. Free energy, for example, something that I feel has a lot of scientific basis, but there's no money in it. There's no money. And so it's something that has been suppressed, if not actively embargoed. But Tim, according to Tesla's research, where are we in terms of time travel and teleportation?
Well, and you have to realize that in Tesla's heyday, which would have been, the late 19th, early 20th century, time travel, the concept of time, I mean, that was something that scientists really didn't talk too much about. That was more of a philosophical type of discussion rather than scientific. Tesla himself really didn't talk too much about time, with the exception of an unusual experience that he had. It would have been in the late 19th century, and he told a newspaper reporter that he just recently had almost been killed in a laboratory accident, and he said that he had been they'd been experimenting with of all things rotating magnetic fields when one of the Tesla generators that they were working with shorted, and he was struck by an arc of electricity. Now, Tesla said that it felt to him in this brief period of time that he was within this electrified field, that he was outside of time and space, that he could see all of time as if it was one moment. And I know that's difficult for a lot of your listeners to conceive, but this is something that a lot of Eastern philosophies embrace, that there's really no such thing as a past, present, and future, that time is just one eternal now. And that was the way that Tesla put it, basically. He said that he could see the past, the present, and the future all at once, that he could see the entire universe all at once, that it was almost like he was an observer outside of our universe, looking down into that. I mean, and he was having trouble himself, trying to adequately describe this using, our inadequate words. But he just felt that this experience gave him a glimpse of our reality, and that our reality was something, at least at that time, was completely beyond what we knew when it came to science and physics and everything like that. Fortunately, his assistant was able to use a wooden board and knock him out of this electrified field. If he had remained in it much longer, he would have been dead. But he was left he was left profoundly shaken by this incident. Some people have said that he had like a near-death experience. It sounds very much like it when you look at some of the modern stories of near-death experiences. To me, though, it sounds an awful lot like these. There are some people who have profound events in their life, generally not created by something as deadly as what Tesla went through, where they have an epiphany and they're able to see very clearly life, the universe, and everything. and Tesla's experience sounds very much like some of these mystical experiences that some people have, even though, Tesla's experience was brought about, by an almost disaster. But the same thing has happened with, with other people who have had, almost like near-death experiences. They've fallen off of a cliff, and on the way down, they feel like that they've been removed from time and space, and that moment from falling before they hit. And so I think that Tesla, that gave him some ideas on maybe some new experiments and some new research that he could do from that point on, because I think that we see some very interesting ideas and concepts that start out at this point and are continuing even to this day. I mean, we have like the so-called Philadelphia experiment, and the Montauk project, and maybe some of these other deep black budget science projects that have come on. And I think that we can trace a lot of this back to Tesla's near-death experience.
I've heard a few different stories of people pulling out information from what I deem to be hyperspace. I just mentioned in the first hour Steve Jobs. This is at least reputed. I can't verify that this actually happened, but he, according to what I've read, there claims that he stated that he invented the mouse for the computer based on an LSD experience. And there have been many people that have brought back information from these hyperspace realms. And I can relate to this. It's kind of like a database, a computer database, where on the screen you're only shown what appears on the web page. However, all of the information still exists within the database. It's a matter of being able to access the database. Psychics call it the Akashic Records. And I imagine that this experience showed him the Akashic Records all at once, or gave him the ability to tap into those records in order to pull these ideas out.
Yeah, spiritualists used to call it the ether. And they would say, oh, it
there
came
you
from
go,
the ether. I pulled it from the ether. And actually, didn't Tesla talk about the ether?
Yeah, Tesla's idea of the ether was a little bit different than what you're referring to. The ether was a popular concept, especially with science in the 19th century, talking about how light and radiation and things like that could travel through the vacuum of space. They felt that it needed a medium, like how sound waves travel through our atmosphere. They felt that there was an atmosphere in space, so to speak, called the ether, in which light and radiation and other things could propagate from. Now, supposedly, Einstein's discoveries through ether out of the water. But, now as we're getting more and more advanced, and, we're looking at, quantum theory and things like that. And now with the supposed discovery of dark energy and, dark matter, the ether may be something that, could be looked at again.
Think about that during the break. We'll be right back right here, Beyond the Veil with Tim Swartz.